I know if I were the GM of the Phoenix Suns, there's a couple guys that I would be very comfortable taking in the top 10.
You mean you think that there's a possibility that they would trade up to get into the top 10, draft a player only to turn it around to get somebody different?
Yeah.
I've been thinking, does the option of trading up in the draft actually potentially help fix the Suns more than anything else we've looked at? Getting a young talent under your contractual control that can help now and build for the future, moving up higher in the draft.
I mean, it definitely can if there's somebody that they like in particular and that they don't think is going to fall all the way to number 22. There are a lot of teams in this draft that you look at and they have multiple picks. And if you can find a way to entice them and swap there, maybe move up a few spots or move up even further, depending on what you're willing to give up. My thing is you have to know which guy that you really want, and you have to hit on that pick as well, because you can't trade up for a guy that doesn't come in and contribute for you with this team's window being what it is and doesn't grow into something long-term that's really special. So I think if you are trading up, you got to know exactly what you're doing, and you've got to really like that player.
But isn't the same thing to be said if you stay at 22? You got to hit on that guy to help you now too.
I mean, your percentages technically should be higher if you get into the top 10 of the draft of hitting on a good prospect versus 22. So if they trade up, you're damn right they better know who they want. Man.
Yeah, I mean, it's if they trade up and you get into the top 10, you better not take Jalen Smith again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't think he's draft eligible still.
You got to know what you're trading up for. You're
assuming that there's not another Jalen Smith out there.
Oh, I'm sure there is another guy.
There's probably about 10 Jalen Smiths in this draft. So the chances of you running into another one is high.
Phoenix Suns select Jalen Smith, forward, South Dakota State.
Yeah. No, this is a tricky draft. I don't like this draft at the top. So I think trading up in this draft is very risky. Because I still think some of the best talent in this draft is going to be later. I will say I believe the Suns are really looking at significantly moving up in this draft, which is an interesting dynamic. But I also think there's other ways to look at it. That, is there a possibility of trading up in this draft and then maybe using that leverage or that ammunition to do something else later? That could be a possibility too. So there's a lot of options on the table. I know if I were the GM of the Phoenix Suns, there's a couple guys that I would be very comfortable taking in the top 10.
You mean you think that there's a possibility that they would trade up to get into the top 10, draft a player only to turn it around to get somebody different?
Yep.
Interesting.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, if you can trade up from 22 and maybe move a contract and then get into the top 10, and there's a team that loves that pick in the top 10, could you potentially trade back and take two of their picks for one and still get one guy that you really like and maybe somebody that
a project?
Yeah, maybe a project, a little more potential. So, could this be a kind of we're going to sacrifice 22 on a player to potentially be in position to get two picks in this draft and have a better chance of hitting that? I believe there's a lot of things they're looking at. I believe they are looking to moving up. There's a possibility to stay where they are. And I think they're intrigued also with the possibility of moving back. So, I mean, I do like the fact that from what I'm hearing, no rocks unturned. They're looking at everything and they're not ruling anything out, which is why you can't ignore in this draft, because I believe they could be in position to get one of these guys.
I would say that the Suns would have a better chance of trading up in the draft if they're not offering 22, but instead they're offering 2031. Because you would think that somebody that wants to move out of this draft is just not in love with any of the prospects as much. So they're willing to trade, but trading within the same draft probably doesn't make sense. So, I would think that that 2031 pick would be more, expendable.
What if you're a team that's around 9 to 12 and you have come to the conclusion that I've come to, that some of the best players are going to fall to 18 to 24. And you're saying, you know what, if you're willing to give me a player that's on your roster right now that I like, that fits my system, and I could still get a guy that I like down the road, it's a win-win for me instead of just sitting at 8 and selecting a guy because I think a lot of GMs in this spot, the one thing they don't want to do, which I can't stand, I can't fathom why people think this way, but you hear the word reach all the time, and they're terrified of at 8 taking the guy that they love because the draft board has him at 18. Like, if you love a guy, take him.
James Jones has no problem doing that.
James Jones doesn't, and I don't. And I actually, listen. It matters how it ends up playing out. Mm-hmm. Cam Johnson was a reach, and then if you redo that draft, it wasn't a reach. Mm-hmm. Now Jalen Smith was a miss, right? But I lean towards the guy that's willing to do that. I don't like guys that just stick to a board and say, well, yeah, I like this guy more, but I like Saul more, but I'm going to take Gerald because Gerald on all the draft boards is ranked higher. Like, as a basketball evaluator, that shit bothers me because I'm like, yo, just take the guy that you think is your guy.
So I agree with that. I also think, though, that if you, like you've been talking about, if you can trade back and still get the guy that you love and maybe pocket an extra asset, you have to be able to read the room in terms of, like, do these guys think that he's as high? Because if these guys behind me don't think that this guy is that guy and they're not interested in him, I can get him for later and I can swindle an extra pick or something out of them. So you don't want to be that team if you're trading up, but you do want to be the team that's like, yeah, this guy's a sure thing. We know that we have to sacrifice something to get this guy. Because we talked about some guys that are probably going to go in the top 10 or the top, the lottery. Probably not going to be there when the Suns are on the board, but if they could find a way to get some of these guys, it might be worth it.
And the other problem is, I get what you're saying, Flex, about, if a team identifies a player on the Suns that they would like to be able to take in a trade because it makes them instantly a little bit better than relying on a draft pick. But the Suns are kind of in a similar position where they can't really sacrifice players that can contribute at a high level. So your window is kind of narrowed to about 2 or 3 dudes on this roster right now that you don't feel confident can contribute at a high level that maybe another team might. So you're looking at Nasir Little, you're looking at Nurk, maybe Royce O'Neal if he gets signed beforehand.
You can't trade him, though.
Oh, yeah, you can't trade him. You can't trade Grayson either. So, like, that's basically it. Just those 2 guys.
It's the usual suspects.
And so, like, that's kind of a hope in the clouds for sure.
I'd deal 2022 and then the 2031 pick because, to me, what has everybody said? You need to get younger. You need to find a cheap talent that can help you, but you also have to have an eye to the future. If you can get the right guy, say you wind up in that 9 to 12 range that you said, or even higher, whatever, and you have a guy that you feel like could be a quality bench player now and grow into a guy that could either be that next generation to be next to Devin Booker or be an asset that you can then trade come 2026 to find that next guy when a Kevin Durant's gone or a Bradley Beal's gone. I think that's the kind of calculated move you can make because you're not finding that guy in a vet minimum. You're not finding that guy in a trade for Nasir Little. Like, that's the calculated risk I think that you can take this offseason that we haven't really discussed to try to find that talent because you've backed yourself into a corner. We've made that very clear with our Veteran Minimum Mondays and our Trade Machine Tuesdays. And you brought Matt Telemann to try to get creative. This may be the one loophole in your CBA second apron is to try to find that guy on a controllable contract that you believe in.
It's also, this is why when everybody talks about, like, when we talk about trades and like really the last couple of days and last couple of weeks, every time we've talked about trades, I swear I see the same comment about, oh, you're just going to manage, or you're just going to leverage the future for right now and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, guys, like, listen, this is the NBA. Maybe Devin Booker does, but he's probably the one out of everybody else on that roster. Eventually, these dudes are either going to be gone in free agency or they're going to be traded. Like, that's just the reality of the business. So you're going to get back some draft capital at a certain point. If the Suns don't get very far in the playoffs this year, you're looking at a couple different scenarios where you might have to trade some key assets right now for draft capital coming up. And so I don't look at it as everything. You have to think about these things as draft picks and players. They're all in one category. They're all assets. And so whether you have one or the other doesn't really matter because at some point you're going to swap one for the other two.
Right.
And it's just how many can you get? That's the difference. You're not going to get 4 picks for KD, right? Like those are the things that are going to change.
Yeah.
If you as you move forward.
No, and another thing about this theory of moving up or moving back, when I look at this, I say if I'm moving up, if I'm the Phoenix Suns in the position I am in financially, contractually, draft pick wise, if I'm moving up in this draft to get into that 8 to 12 range, I am not worried about positional fit. I'm taking the best player.
Best player on you.
Best player
that
available.
you feel. Not based on boards, just the guy you think is the guy that'll become a star.
Yes, best basketball player. And that's what Sacramento did when they took Tyrese Halliburton knowing they had De'Aaron Fox there. And they turned Tyrese Halliburton into Domantas Sabonis, right? That's what the Philadelphia 76ers did when they took Tyrese Maxey with James Harden right in front of him. Like sometimes that's what the Phoenix Suns did when they took Devin Booker with Eric Bledsoe and Brandon Knight in front of him. Like, I don't get locked into, well, we need a backup center, so we're going to move up and take a backup center. That like take the best basketball player, let the cookie crumble. Basketball has a way of working itself out. And if you take a player that necessarily, maybe he's a guard, and you're looking and you're like, I got Devin Booker and Brad Beal. Why would I take this guard? Well, you take that damn guard because that guy's going to show the potential he has eventually and may put you in a position to go get a better player down the road if you package him in the deal. So for my liking, if the Suns move up, I'm saying go get a basketball player, regardless of position.
Yeah, and they have needs in the backcourt. They have needs on the wing. They have needs at the center spot. So it's not like you have a specific draft need for this team. The needs for this team are everywhere right now.
That's true.
So you can. This is why with this draft, especially, we've talked about this before. There are a lot of players that we feel like the best player in this draft probably it might not come from the top 10. It might come from the teens or the 20s or something. There's still going to be role players available that can help you. So for me, I feel like sitting at 22, you're in a good spot. And if you need to trade up, there are a couple of teams that have multiple picks in this draft that you can kind of target, or even if you want to move down, like Utah has number 10, but they also have 29 and 32. Yes. So like you have some flexibility there depending on how draft night is shaking out to get a player that can help you at any position. So for me, like trading up, I worry about attaching that 2031 pick unless the proof is going to be in the pudding. If you do that, the guy that you get better be a fixture in your organization for years to come, because otherwise you just lost a first rounder to move up in a draft that is not as star heavy as most drafts.